Distinguished participants, good morning. Thank you for coming and joining us here at the Capacity Building Hub. And I welcome you to this side event towards country-owned capacity building and capacity gaps and needs assessments. My name is Roberta Ianna, and I am one of the co-chair of the Paris Committee of Capacity Building, and it will be my pleasure to moderate this side event this morning. Capacity building, as we all know, is central to achieving the objectives of the Convention and the Paris Agreement. Developing countries, in particular least developed countries and small island developing states, need to urgently enhance and find ways to maintain adequate systemic, institutional and individual capacities to carry out climate change adaptation and mitigation action at large. This requires the development of endogenous capacities, meaning capacity that is locally and nationally owned and that ultimately can be maintained and enhanced independently from international support. Country-owned capacity does not start with the capacity building intervention, but also imply a shift of the assessment of capacity gaps and needs to the national and local level, where the understanding of existing and emerging needs, challenges and strengths is greatest. During the next 17 minutes, we will launch the PCCB technical paper on enhancing the ownership of developing countries of building and maintaining capacity for climate action. And we will also introduce the recently published toolkit to assess gaps and needs in capacity building to implement the Paris Agreement. So I hope it will be a very interesting topic for all of you. And in addition to this, we will hear from a former PCCB member and distinguished Indonesian capacity building expert about the country's experience with conducting a comprehensive capacity gaps and needs assessment. And I'm also very excited to welcome several distinguished panelists who will provide their reflections today on the technical paper and the toolkit as well on the role of networks in supporting country-owned capacity building and capacity gaps and needs assessment. So now I'm pleased to hand over the microphone to my fellow PCCB member Kun Zhang from Bhutan for a short presentation of our new technical paper and our toolkit. Please, Kun Zhang, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Moderator, distinguished delegates, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. As Roberta introduced, my name is Kun Zhang. I'm from Bhutan. I am member of PCCB and also lead for Working Group 4, which deals with identifying gaps and needs. It is my pleasure and honor really to present the key findings and recommendations from our new technical paper on enhancing ownership of developing countries of building and maintaining capacity for climate action. In the second part of my presentation, I'll introduce another key product that's being launched by PCCB in 2022. That is Toolkit to assess capacity gaps and needs to implement the Paris Agreement. Going on with the first presentation on the technical paper, the key objective of this paper is to identify experiences, good practices, and lessons learned related to enhancing ownership of developing country, developing and maintaining capacity for climate action. Besides hoping of its direct relevance to the capacity building stakeholder around the globe and at all levels, the paper also serves to inform the PCCB's future work and serve as a basis of our official recommendation to the COP and CMA on this matter in a year to come. In terms of methodology, this technical paper is based on and derived from several sources. First being information contained in 16 submissions received by PCCB in response to our call for submission from July to November 2021. Second, the responses gathered in 16 interviews conducted in August and September 2022 with capacity building experts which are nominated by our PCCB members. And third, insights from the submission and interview have been complemented with findings from the PCCB previous work on country ownership and review and analysis of further information shared by interviewees and bilateral and multilateral capacity building providers. So if you look at the submissions, the diverse range of entities contributed to submissions and participated in expert interviews. If you look at the graph, the leftmost graph, the submission and expert interviews are divided by type of entity with the highest number of contributions from developing country parties, followed by UN and intergovernmental organizations, civil society, international network or initiative, academic development, developed country parties, and the private sector. In the center graph, the submission and expert interviews are divided by region of entity. In the extreme right, the submission and expert interviews are divided by type of countries of entity with highest number of contribution from entities residing in developing countries parties. Of course, not LDCs and SIDS, followed by those in developed countries parties, LDCs and SIDS. The interviews were identified with the view of ensuring more balanced representation of views and perspectives in the paper in terms of balance of region, as no submission had been received from Latin America and Caribbean region, and in terms of parties, as all submission had been made by non-party stakeholder. Having addressed that on the objective and methodology, I now proceed to present some of the key findings on experiences, good practices, and lessons learned with regard to enhancing country ownership of capacity and maintaining capacity. Distinguished delegates, colleagues, as I have to be very brief here in the interest of time, I invite you to study actual paper for further detail on the individual findings. The findings are categorized under different stages of capacity building processes, namely the identification of capacity building needs, planning and design of capacity building intervention, implementation of capacity building intervention, monitoring and evaluation in this regard, and maintenance and retention of capacity. First, the capacity needs assessment should be conducted in a way that's holistic, multi-level, participatory, and collaborative. Second, the capacity building design and planning should be based on national climate change policies, action plans, and existing in-country expertise, experience, ability, and indigenous knowledge. Be applied at individual, international, institutional, and systemic level, and should enable a flexible and adaptive management. The third finding is that capacity building implementation should be developed for or tailored to national, subnational, and local contexts, be delivered by domestic experts and stakeholders, and supported by climate finance for stakeholders at subnational and local level, and also be supported by South-South cooperation. Next slide. The fourth, the capacity monitoring and evaluation should be focused on the impacts rather than on the process, and required for 6 to 12 months after the intervention has ended. Fifth and final finding is to achieve, in order to achieve climate capacity retention and capacity building should be built on or involve institutions that do not rely on support received through respective capacity building intervention, and be focused on supporting non-party stakeholder in addition to governmental institution, leverage universities as knowledge institution can retain capacity, and tap on international support and exchange of knowledge and expertise. Distinguished delegates, in the submissions and responses to the interview question, party and non-party stakeholder also highlighted various challenges with regards to enhancing the ownership of developing country. In terms of challenges at the capacity building provider level, first, some capacity building providers continue to carry out capacity building intervention that are not based on domestic priorities and needs, and continue to be guided by one-size-fits-all approach with little adjustment to local context. or assumption of validity and applicability of developed country knowledge to all contexts and situations. Second, many interventions are limited to short-term approaches, therefore not having required buy-in from participating stakeholders. Third, many capacity building providers continue to have in place those cumbersome requirements for applying for the capacity building support, which many developing country stakeholders cannot meet due to lack of human, technical, and financial resources. Fourth, monitoring and evaluation may be limited to indicators that often only focus on quantitative outputs with focus on better ways of understanding positive effect of networks, relationship, change attitudes and behavior. In terms of challenges at the domestic level, first, developing country parties often have limited human resources and technical capacity to apply for capacity building support and comply with respective reporting requirement. Secondly, the coordination between the government entities at and between national and sub-level and local level, as well as with different stakeholder group, can be difficult to achieve, and thus preventing effective implementation of capacity building intervention. Third, the non-party stakeholder often face the problem of inadequate infrastructure and modality to exchange with their peers domestically. Fourth, maintaining capacity at individual level can be challenging, as individuals in particularly subnational level often move to different jobs within their country or internationally. Fifth, the uneven power dynamics between the capacity building providers and developing countries and between institutions within developing country can result in goals and objectives that are not in line with local needs. Moving to next slide. In response to these challenges that I have highlighted before, the following recommendation on enhancing the ownership of developing country of building and maintaining capacity for climate action are proposed based on the submissions and responses to interviews provided by parties and non-party stakeholders. First, the support should be increased for holistic capacity building assessment at national, sub-national and local level, building on successful approaches used for technology needs assessment and development of technology action plans. Such capacity building needs assessment should contribute to developing an understanding of overall domestic needs for capacity building to implement countries' NDCs as well as to developing strategies to address such needs. Second, a multi-stakeholder approach should be applied by engaging a broad range of party and non-party stakeholders across national, subnational, and local level, including academia, civil society, indigenous people, youth, and private sector when undertaking capacity needs assessment and when designing, planning, implementing, and monitoring, evaluating capacity building intervention based on identified needs. Third, the political support should be fostered by highlighting co-benefit of capacity building for climate action, including financial benefits, for example, through increased resilience, cost saving through more resource-efficient approaches, and income generation, for example, through ability to benefit from international carbon markets. Fourth, the long-term capacity building intervention needs to be developed, moving away from project-based to programmatic approaches that aim to become self-sufficient. In this context, there is a need to ensure that capacity building at the individual level is complemented by capacity building at the institutional and systemic level with a focus on enabling the implementation of countries' NDCs and NAP. Fifth, the international and regional and domestic knowledge network, platforms, communities of practices and peer-to-peer support should be strengthened. In this context, availability of adequate resources needs to be ensured, and successful network and platforms should be replicated in regions and on topics for which they do not yet exist. including through the use of South-South cooperation. 6, it is important to build on local capacity and indigenous knowledge and develop national and regional roster of experts on relevant issues to access available expertise more easily. The development of such roster of experts should be done in collaborative manner with the local academic institution, which could also serve as a host for such experts. 7, the incentive schemes and mechanism needs to be developed to maintain capacity in developing country, in particularly SITs and LDCs, including through improved working condition of domestic experts. 8, the developed countries should ensure that more climate finance is available for standalone capacity building programs at national, subnational, and local level, and that such funding can be accessed by both party and non-party stakeholder. 9th, the developed countries should increase coordination among capacity building providers from developed and developing country entities to ensure more informed, coherent, and transformative capacity building approaches, better dissemination of information on available capacity building support, and less cumbersome application and reporting processes. 10th and finally, developed countries and multilateral institutions should provide dedicated and predictable long-term support for strengthening of institutional arrangement in developing countries that can facilitate capacity building across different areas of adaptation and mitigation action. Such institutional arrangement could include national level structure to support the work of PCCB and to ensure that policy recommendation and knowledge products prepared by PCCB are disseminated at national, subnational, and local levels in developing countries. So with this slide, I conclude my first part of the presentation, and I wish to provide you with a very quick introduction to the PCCB's toolkit to assess capacity gaps and needs to implement the Paris Agreement. PCCB developed this toolkit to support the efforts of countries to identify and address their capacity needs and gaps to meet the challenges of climate change. It was launched officially at a webinar held in March this year. You can access the toolkit and relevant document via the QR code, which is on the screen right now. The toolkit provides an overview of the capacity assessment cycle as well as complementary resources, including case studies, tools, best practices, and lessons learned. It aims to guide the assessment process that enables country to identify appropriate steps that can take to strengthen their national capacities to address climate change and ultimately implement their NDCs under the Paris Agreement. The toolkit is also meant to serve as a resource for developing country officials and implementing partners in assessment of relevant capacity needs and in determination of gaps to implement the Paris Agreement. It draws from the work of the UNDP, GEF, GCF, IUCN, FAO, and other international development cooperation organizations who focus on supporting developing countries to implement the Rio Conventions. Toolkit also includes examples of qualitative and quantitative tools to assist with capacity assessment. Specific case study examples are included in order to demonstrate concrete links to various assessment processes that has been developed as part of the support provided by the constituted body of the UNFCCC, International Development Institutes, and other implementing organizations. Toolkit also links to other additional resources that may be accessed on the UNFCCC capacity building portal and other online sources to inspire countries further work on the capacity building. Toolkit recommends a capacity assessment cycle across 5 stages, including inception, assessment, analysis, development, and implementation, and monitoring and evaluation, and outlines key steps under each of these 5 stages. It is also directly linked to the 5 stages of the capacity assessment cycle. The toolkit presents total of 8 case studies from the countries shown in this slide. this slide that showcases initiatives to undergo capacity assessment relating to climate change. Distinguished delegates, you learn more about the case study, one of the case studies in more detail in next presentation by my colleague Mahawan from Indonesia. If you go to next slides. To give you one another example, one case study highlights the initiative undertaken by government of Malawi in partnership with UNDP and the One UN Climate Change Learning Partnership. Together, they published country's first national climate learning strategy based on stakeholder meetings and extensive research. The strategy seeks to address critical knowledge gaps in development of informed policies and programs to meet the challenges of climate change. The finding emphasized the need for more robust human resources, stronger national systems and institutions, and sustainable financing system to support these initiatives. Since then, government of Malawi has published a follow-up strategy up to 2030. So, my dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, let me finish the presentation. I'm sorry for taking a little long. Let me finish my presentation on a very positive note. We are very much aware that language can be a barrier when it comes to capacity building, therefore influencing on how parties and other stakeholders can and cannot use PCCB's technical products. While our own resources at PCCB are very limited, we have heard the request of our stakeholders to have our technical products available in multiple languages and have intensified our effort to seek support on this. Towards this, we are very pleased to inform you that the toolkit is currently being translated into French, Spanish, Arabic, thanks to a very generous support provided by RCC Dubai, Foundation Avina, a very active PCCB network member. As soon as the translated versions are ready, we will post them on our webpage and capacity building portal and inform our stakeholders via social media. With this, I would like to hand over to the moderator, Roberta, for the moderation of next part of the event. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Kunzang, for your rich presentation, and we really hope that today's side event will enhance the understanding of key challenges, best practices and lessons learned with regard of enhancing developing country ownership of capacity building and tools available to support developing countries in assessing their gaps and needs to implement the Paris Agreement. And we really hope that you all here today will find the paper and the toolkit useful to your climate-related capacity building efforts and your own context back in your country. So I'm pleased now to turn to Mahawan Karunyasa. Sorry. Thank you. I'm pleased now to turn to Mr. Mahawan Karunyasa, who is connected virtually. And Mahawan is a former colleague and PCCB member and as a founding member of the Asia Climate Expert Group. He is the chairman of the Indonesia Expert Network of Climate Change and Forestry since 2017. Currently, Mahawan is a lecturer at the School of Environmental Science at the University of Indonesia and CEO of the Environment Institute, which is an independent organization focused on climate change and sustainability issues. So he should be connected with us. Hi, Mahawan. Many thanks for joining us today from Indonesia. And please, the floor is yours.
Okay, colleagues, thank you very much, Roberta, and happy to see you, Alejandro, Tusan, and also Ilan and Mika and my colleagues, Juan. Okay, I would like to share my slide.
Hawan, just give us a couple of minutes while we sort out the slides.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm waiting.
By the way, thank you again for joining us. What time is it in Indonesia now? I think it's a bit later than here.
Yes, it's 5 hours difference. Now it's about in the evening in Jakarta. Sorry, it's evening. Actually, it's afternoon in Jakarta. It's already about almost 4 o'clock.
Okay, then not too late. Then thank you very much again for being with us today. We miss you here in COP27.
Oh, my pleasure.
Please go ahead, and as soon as available, the slides will be posted.
Okay. need to scale up the impact of capacity building activities. This about the experience from Indonesia, Roberta, and thank you very much for this opportunity, and over to you, Roberta and Punsan. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mahawan, for sharing your insights and lessons learned from the capacity gaps and needs assessment undertaken in Indonesia. And further information on this assessment is, of course, contained in the PCCB toolkit, so I invite you really to take a look at it. And without further ado, I will now open the panel discussion and invite our panelists and special guests to express their ideas on the paper and the toolkit. So I'm pleased to have a special guest here today with us, Pilar Bueno Rubial, a senior researcher at the National Council of Scientific and Technical Research of Argentina, who also serves as research coordinator at Impulse South Alliance. Welcome, Pilar. And last but not least, we have with us, virtually connected again, Juan Casado Asensio, a policy analyst in the OECD Development Cooperation Directorate, to our panel here. Juan joined the Development Cooperation Directorate in September 2013, where he works on climate change, biodiversity, and development cooperation. He currently leads a project on capacity development for climate change and on biodiversity-related development finance. He's joining us virtually from Brussels. So welcome, Juan, we can see you. And I would like to invite you both to share your reflection on the PCCB technical paper on developing country ownership of capacity building and on our PCCB toolkit to assess capacity gaps and needs to implement the Paris Agreement. So including your reflection on their usefulness for your own work and or the work of the key stakeholders you work with. So I'd like to take Pilar's comments first and then Juan. So in the interest of time, I'd like to kindly ask each of you to stay under 4 minutes with your intervention. Thank you very much, and the floor is yours, Pilar.
Thank you very much for this invitation. And first of all, I would like to congratulate the PCCB for this new technical paper. We are completely sure that these two reports, not only the technical paper, but also the PCCB tool, are complementary, and I would like to highlight some of the synergies that we identify in both of them, and some particular comments in each of them. So a first comment is related to the objective and the scope of this new technical paper. Let me highlight there that this technical paper is on the heart of the discussion on capacity building, since it's not only focused on capacity building, but also on maintaining that capacity. And this is something that we heard in every single conversation of capacity building during the last years. So we really welcome this approach and all the recommendations made by the PCCB on this piece. At the same time, I would like to highlight how important it is to set the precedent in terms of this conceptual framework related to capacity building that fosters country ownership, and the definition provided by the PCCB on this regard. So if we check and we make a literature review on this regard, we check that there are different conceptual perspectives on this, and it's really a step forward on the PCCB perspective to provide this definition, to use for consistency the capacity building framework that we already see in the tool, and it's now on the technical paper, and that was used by the Impulse South project as a basis for our conceptual framework. since I'm referring to this level, the individual level, the institutional level, and the systemic level. This was very useful for us, and in our project in particular, that was and is focused on identifying needs and gaps in a particular moment of the adaptation policy cycle, that is the vulnerability and risk assessment with a focus on gender, to have this emphasis on the institutional level based on this framework was also very useful. Another thing that I would like to highlight that we are already using as the one that I mentioned before, and that we welcome that this technical paper also is building upon this, is the different, what you call the stages in the capacity building process. So that seems very obvious, but it's not, in terms of identifying, assessing the needs, and how these needs go to the planning and implementation, and the monitoring and evaluation process is critical for us as practitioners, as researchers, as parties. What I mean is that to understand that the capacity building assessment in all these stages can accompany the process of climate policies, adaptation policy cycle, and mitigation policy cycle in all this planning, implementation, and monitoring and evaluation process. So you don't need to do something apart. So you don't need to conduct these processes that are not in a clear dialogue, but you can do when you plan, implement, and monitor your climate policies on mitigation and adaptation. At the same time, you can identify, you can assess the needs and the gaps that you already have in each of these stages is quite critical. So I already have my 4 minutes. At least I wanted to start with those comments, and thank you very much for the invitation again.
Thank you very much, and I'm pleased to pass the floor to Juan. Please.
Yes, thank you. Let me just check if you can hear me well.
Yes, we can hear you.
Perfect. So thanks for the invitation. On the one hand, the paper, as was the case with the PCCB toolkit, is going to make a positive contribution, as also Pilar said, to the general literature on the subject. I think the paper glances very nicely over all the stages of capacity development, and in one resource you can find information on how to tackle the issue of capacity development, from the identification of needs to the planning and the design to the implementation and the monitoring and evaluation, and does touch upon the main challenges and issues that affect the supply side and the demand side of capacity development, so the partner countries and the donors, in how they can deliver capacity development in the area of climate change. But it's also systematically emphasizing the positive experiences, the good practices, and the lessons learned on how developing countries can build, and especially, I think, importantly, maintain their capacity for climate change. I think that's on the one hand. But on the other hand, and probably more importantly, the technical paper is going to make a key contribution, or at least that's how we can see it with in our discussions, with our dialogues with the donor community, to the actual practice of capacity building, of capacity development. I mean, in the case of donors, which is the angle that I can provide some useful insights on, the technical paper is going to become a resource because it's clear. It comes up with practical steps that can help donors navigate these waters of capacity development. Because capacity development is happening in a context where 40% of official development assistance for climate change is already going to activities that have something to do with capacity development, and this is the latest data from 2020. So having such tools are going to be very, very important, and we're missing. We have pieces and bits from here, from there, We did some research on the state of capacity development and how donors were being able to find support and resources, etc. And there was some information, but it was piecemeal. And I think here we find one element, one point where all of it comes together. And just to say some last reflections on this first question, that the paper also has very clear conclusions that we have many gaps, many barriers that prevent effective capacity development, and partner country ownership in the area of capacity development is particularly a problem because we don't manage to get ownership to the levels that should be. The funding is there, but we don't have the tools around which donors can articulate effective solutions. So these positive trends that are highlighted in the paper are good, but we need to now move to something else, a different type of work to ensure that the paper, the toolkit, can go and shift the practice in the right direction. Thank you. That's all from me for now.
Thank you very much, Juan, and thank you, Pilar, for the very interesting and useful views that you expressed on both the technical paper and the toolkit. And I'd like to ask you some more questions exactly on the line of what you were saying, Juan, on what can be now done to further disseminate and promote both the technical paper and the toolkit. And regarding the toolkit, we launched it earlier this year, but we think we received still a little response from users. So we wonder whether it could be a matter of communication, or what can be the obstacle for the use of the toolkit. How can we improve it to be used? Thank you. And I'm sorry, the question is, of course, for both of you. Maybe this time I can start with Juan and then Pilar.
Sure, thank you. I mean, and clearly, the first thing that will be needed is promoting this technical paper. So I think, of course, an event like this is quite useful. And we need to continue disseminating also the toolkit. I mean, we at the OECD can help by continuing organizing events and sharing these resources with the bilateral donor community. And that, is part of the OECD Development Assistance Committee. We can do that in several formats, but it's clear that among our donor community, awareness is limited on the tools. And so this is just part of a broader trend, as unfortunately, on how capacity development itself is conceptualized. So it's capacity development activities are not always being designed in a way that they can promote country ownership or stakeholder engagement, as is documented in this technical paper. So in other words, many activities that are simply happening are not designed to account for effectiveness considerations. And as a result, the bilateral climate portfolios risk being less relevant than that could otherwise be. So I think we need to shift now some of this narrative towards the risks of wasting resources and the existence of tools to prevent that risk. And so this is a problem in the current context where we cannot waste time and where donors have reacted by pledging more financing for climate change in the future. And presumably, a lot of these resources will be spending for capacity development type of activities as they did in the past. So we need the awareness raising. We need to start making them aware of the risks associated with not doing capacity development in a way that incorporates effectiveness. And thirdly, we need to make sure that these tools influence the way they work and how the work is done in each of the stages that are highlighted in the paper and also in the toolkit. And for that, we probably what we would need is to unpack and understand the mechanisms explaining the success, those good practices that are highlighted in the paper, and how did those things come about. To the extent possible, finding ways to incite learning amongst the donors may also be a good way. And we're ready to explore how to do that with the network and with the colleagues of the PCCB, of course.
Thank you very much, Juan. And I'll ask the same questions to Pilar about how to improve communication and dissemination and whether can be the obstacles that prevent from the use of the toolkit from developing countries. Thank you, Pilar.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. First of all, I think that one of the main issues that we need to pay attention is the translation to different languages. It seems pretty obvious, again, but it is quite proved in the UNFCCC world that sometimes the bodies allocate some additional resources in order to do the translation, and that really help a lot, at least the UN languages, help a lot different regions in order to be more involved, because not all the practitioners, the real users of these tools, really are English speakers, and in particular with all this technical language that we are used to have in this space, that it's not necessarily the language of our practitioners and users at home. So that's a first point, and that's also something that was very helpful with our Impulse South guideline, to have a translation in English, Spanish, and French, that were the language of the different national teams that we have, the 6 national teams. Of course, as Juan said, the opportunity to have events is also always very useful. You already have some events on the toolkits. I think that you can benefit from having the synergies, as I said before, between these 2 instruments in order to try to present both of them at not only global events but also regional events. And I was very surprised by this idea that you didn't receive submissions of the Latin American region. Of course, it's my region. So I was surprised. I think it's important, and it's a symptom. So probably we need to pay attention on that regard and try to as soon as possible to have additional events and more engagement with experts and with regional networks. Use academic networks and other practitioner networks already setting. 2 more things quickly are maybe to analyze the opportunity to have user-friendly formats for these documents. The toolkit already have, I think, a user-friendly, but probably the technical paper, it will be a good idea also to have this kind of format. And finally, also to engage maybe with other constituent bodies under the convention. There is a lot of work going on needs in every single constituent body, on adaptation, on technology, on finance. All the bodies are doing work on gaps and needs. So it could be a very good, important point, and in this context of COP27, also trying to see needs across the board and how the different bodies are to have more synergies and more coherence between the bodies with respect to the approach to needs, capacity building, and of course how we maintain that capacity for adaptation, for mitigation, and for the other topics under the convention. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Pilar and Juan, for your additional and very helpful reflections. And given that the focus of today's thematic day here at the Capacity Building Hub is amplifying networks for collective capacity building, my final question to you is how you see the role of networks, including also the PCCB network, in supporting the application of the toolkit and translating the findings and recommendations from the technical paper into action on the ground. And again, in light of the time available, I kindly ask you to be very concise. So, going to Juan.
Sure, thank you. I mean, for us, for the OECD, joining the PCCB network in 2022 and partnering up with you all to organize workshops on capacity development, for example, has been a great way to ensure that our work on capacity development for climate change is shared with the right set of stakeholders, with the right networks, and vice versa. We very much hope to be able to disseminate PCCB network work through our own channels to ensure that, as I said earlier, we can incite action on the ground and change in the way capacity development is being conceptualized by donors. No? The PCCB network, the workshops that we organized have also helped us keep capacity development high up on the agenda of bilateral donors to ensure that they continue reflecting on this very important topic, and a topic, as I said, where they devote substantial amounts of resources, and a topic that is demanded by developing countries as well. So keeping the conversation going and making tools available to the donor community are, for me or for us, key ways to help change the incentive systems and the processes in the donors, in the donor community that will then in turn lead to changes on the ground. So to conclude, maybe just a last thought. I'm very much looking forward to continuing this collaboration in 23 with the network, and to continue unpacking the capacity development agenda, continue having the PCCB tools and papers and guidance, etc., shared with our community. And we already know that next year we will be working on capacity development in a number of topics. We will be focusing in particular on the situation of small island developing states, on mobilizing private finance for climate change adaptation, or on the topic of nature-based solutions. So, for example, these could be key themes for this networking to continue, on future conversations and workshops moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Juan, and thank you for your active participation in the PCCB network. And please, Pilar.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Indeed, in case of the Impulse South project, we also had the opportunity from last year in order to join this network was quite critical, making use of the tools, already the toolkit, as I mentioned before, and for sure, in the case of the technical paper, it will be the same. We participate in several events together, and that was very important, not only for us and for the main partners, but also for the national teams that had the opportunity to share the outcomes of their research in terms of agriculture and coastal areas, on marine coastal sector, on water sector, and different regions of the 4 African countries and the 2 Latin American countries that we have been working on. So we are really looking forward to continue this conversation, to continue using your tools, and I'm very happy to participate in this network the next year also with new ideas.
Thank you very much, Pilar. And thank you, both of you, for your final remarks and being, as I said to Juan already, a very active participant to the PCCB network. And now I would like to open the floor for questions, if you have any, on the paper and the toolkit, to the PCCB, and also to Mahawan, who I think is still connected with us. So if you have any question, please, the floor is open.
Yes, hello. I am new to the PCCB, but I find it very useful. I want to also to explore more. But here I want to raise a question or an inquiry about the interrelationships between, as you know, capacity building in itself is not an objective in itself. It is a tool way to at least here in the climate arena, we want to achieve the Paris Agreement and all the related obligations towards it. So I would like to ask about the interrelationship between this committee and the other, if you can say, entities or institutions that also serving the Paris Agreement. specifically in relations to reporting, to transparency report, all, I mean, issues that at the end needs capacity to perform it, also in negotiation. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. And well, the capacity, the Paris Committee on Capacity Building was established in 2015 with the mandate to enhance coherence and coordination on capacity building efforts within and outside the convention. So also with regard to constituted bodies, we have an informal coordination group with which we are regularly in touch with other constituted bodies of the Convention and of the Paris Agreement, and to learn what they are doing on capacity building. We have also on the website, where the PCCB web page is, for a document with the calendar of events and activities of each constituted bodies related to capacity building. So I think this is how we are dialoguing with the other agenda items, let's say, and the other constituted bodies, again, to enhance coherence in capacity building activities and efforts. I don't know if there was another question. Please.
Okay, this is Hammam Al-Quzmazi. Thank you so much for the very interesting insights and the information you shared. Just one question, please, when it comes to the dissemination of
Social media, LinkedIn, there's a page on LinkedIn dedicated to capacity building and UN climate change. And what is true is that also there are so many information out there, and it's difficult to find a space and not to overlap with so many similar information. So the idea of building the network is really to create coherence and coordination also outside in the information circulation. So we hope, we are working for it and hope to be more and more successful. So I don't know if there is time for more questions, because we are already running out of time. So thank you very much for your participation. And I'd like now to invite Mikhail Nekvazil, because I always call you Mikhail, but never by your last name, Nekvazil, from the European Commission, currently seconded to the Czech presidency of the EU Council. So, Michael, thank you for being here with us today, and I give you the floor for the closing remarks.
So, thanks a lot, Roberta. Thanks a lot to the UNFCCC Secretariat and the PCCB Secretariat for organizing this event and for inviting me. I have indeed two hats on, one being the European Union Czech presidency, and the other one, the European Commission. I would like to make a few final, very concrete and clear implementation remarks, since we are on the implementation summit. First, whenever we are talking about implementation, to simplify things, there are three things that are needed. It's finance, technology, and capacity. And as many of us have seen, finance and technology is pretty useless unless there is a capacity on the side of the country, region, local authorities, or any other entity implementing policies and projects that would help implement the Paris Agreement. Second remark is that, at least from my limited experience of doing development assistance on several continents, usually it was the lack of capacity. Not the money, not the technology, but the capacity that was the main reason for a low impact or low efficiency of policies, of projects. So I think we should finally abandon the current situation where capacity is sort of small Cinderella among the other ones, and put it at the center of all that we are trying to do. Third, the capacity is clearly both key for designing and implementing policies on one hand, and also concrete projects and their sustainability on national level. And it's a no-brain. It's nothing difficult or nothing serious about the fact that if we want to enhance the capacity, we first need to know what the needs and gaps are. And I do find the toolkit, a fantastic tool. And again, taking the experience from the development assistance I've been involved in, should we had such a toolkit, we could have been way more efficient. And as Juan mentioned previously, 40% of development money has a capacity building component. So come on, how much money we are talking about that we could, or whose use we could improve. Finally, we've got the technical paper, and it is once again a great tool, as it was said, putting a life cycle, project cycle approach in place with the identification of needs, designing of interventions, implementing the interventions, and their monitoring. So what I would like to do here is to appeal on all the countries, all the regions, local authorities, any other beneficiaries to please use the toolkit. We have it, it's developed, it's here, and it's a pity not to use it. If you find it too complicated, simplify it. If you find only part of it useful, use this part. And please also do not forget what the Article 21C of the Paris Agreement says, that all the financial flows must be in line with mitigation and adaptation of objectives. So please do involve also other ministries and other institutions, not only those that are involved in the environment and climate change issues. Then I would like to appeal on the countries that underwent already a pilot assessment to encourage the others to use it, to tell them what your experience was, what is useful, what is in it for them, so that we get the tool promoted, especially now when we have it in we will have it in several other languages. And I see in the audience GIZ, I saw people in need, many other entities who are already in it, already in the development assistance, already helping the beneficiaries to enhance their capacity. So please do use the toolkit, do find the obstacles why it's not yet used so much, and try to help as much as you can. And a final remark, appeal on all of you who are here with us and online to spread the word about this tool so that it's used as much as possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Michael, for these excellent closing remarks. And now I can only thank you all for joining us here. Thank our distinguished panelists and guests. We really enjoyed the time here presenting the toolkit and the technical paper, and I'd like to ask you a few more minutes to fill in the anonymous post-event survey. There is the QR code on the screen to access the survey, is here on the slide, as your feedback for us is really important to continuously improve our work. So thank you everyone, and see you again here at the Capacity Building Hub in the next days. Thank you.